Just gonna do some happy little flowers today. Just these little happy guys. Look at them.
Hello again, welcome back folks. Nuri here with HCA. I'm Housing Corporation of America's art director and program instructor in the Antelope Valley. I do a number of art classes in Lancaster and Palmdale, as well as these illustration and art videos that I hope that you have been enjoying for the past few weeks. The goal is ultimately get everybody excited about doing art, making things, and putting it all within reach so that folks have the tools they need to be creative. Today, we are going to be making a watercolor botanical illustration, basically a flower. This is something that would be great on a greeting card, perfect for Mother's Day, or just in case you like flowers in general. It's a really common subject, and this hopefully will be a way that you can approach flowers a little bit differently. They're not exactly difficult to do, but you know, they have some pieces. There's the petals and the stems and all sorts of other things that could get jumbled along the way. So we're going to demystify that and show you how to do a botanical illustration just by using shapes and some basic colors. With that said, let's jump in. Okay, like usual, we are going to start off by going over the tools of the trade. I hope that all these materials are things that you can pick up relatively easily and economically as well. So first off, paper. I'm going to be using watercolor paper for this because we are going to be doing a watercolor illustration. You can cut your piece of paper down to any size if you see fit. It doesn't have to be the full sheet here like I'm using, but that's what we're going with. Secondly, we're going to need a pencil. A number 2 HB pencil will work perfectly. With a pencil, you're going to need an eraser. If yours is kind of worn down like mine, you can also get a supplementary eraser on the side, although this one is kind of worn out too, but it works well. Next, a watercolor palette. This is the one I used in a tutorial a few weeks back. This is, once again, a fairly standard and cheap and easy option to find at any art supply department or corner drugstore. Brushes. A couple brushes will be helpful at a few different sizes. This green one is the one that actually came with this watercolor kit, so we can roll with that. I'll be using this to fill in larger areas, and then we have a couple of smaller brushes just for little details here and there. A paper towel is handy for cleaning brushes and or wiping up any spills you might incur along the journey, and then a jar or glass or cup of water. Okay, I think that's everything. Let's jump right in. Now, to get started, I should note that flowers are fun, they're easy, but they can also have a lot of parts that make it a little, I want to say difficult, but a little complicated to draw. So what we're going to do is we're going to simplify this process just by using basic shapes to create the overall look of our flower, and then we're going to go in and add in petals, stem, and all the other recognizable parts. So, pressing lightly, what I'm going to do, also, before we really jump in, I should note that we're just going to be doing a simple daisy here. I was thinking about doing a rose, but roses are a little bit, let's just say cliche, so we're going to go with a nice simple daisy that we can color in any way we see fit. So, to start off, I'm going to go with the overall shape. So I'm going to actually start by drawing a little bit of kind of like a half dome here. Let's just go ahead, or a half a circle. And then after I have the half circle in, I'm going to go ahead and draw an ellipsis to cut off the half circle at the point where it ends and they all meet. So another way of looking at this is kind of looks like half of an orange, or a cup of sorts, a little bowl. So that is what we are going to start off with. I apologize also if it's a little bit hard to see, as it will get darker as we continue on. The next thing we are going to add is going to be the stem. To do so, we are going to add in a line right here, just kind of curving down a little bit, and it's just a singular line. After you have that singular line in place, you can go ahead and draw a line that runs directly next to the previous line that you drew, and that is going to make it so it's not just a simple line and it's actually a shape. Okay, the stem is in. Once the stem is in, we are going to start defining some petals. Now I'm going to draw some guidelines here that are eventually going to end up looking like petals. So what I'm doing is I'm starting at, let's just call it the rim of our bowl, and then I'm going to draw a curved line that comes and meets the point where these petals are going to meet the stem. So I'm going to repeat that almost like we're sectioning an orange. Now I've got one starting here and meeting down. I've got the next one starting maybe a ½ inch or so away and then coming down. The next one, I'm going to switch directions, or actually, you know what? For the next one, we're going to go right down the middle. This is relatively straight line. It may not end up staying straight, but for now, it's going to be straight. And then we're going to do the same thing, except our curve's going the opposite way. So as you can see, this kind of looks like a watermelon rind or segments to an orange. Next thing we're going to do is the same thing on the inside, except we're going to have these lines imaginarily do the same thing. So we're starting at the outer edge of our flower, and then we still want these lines to meet the stem. However, I'm not going to actually have them cut through what we just drew. So I'm going to draw a curved line that's going to stop when we get to the other side of the rim of the bowl. Okay, I think that should do for now. This is going to be kind of a flower that's cupped a little bit or curved. Okay, so we have our lines, and our flower is, for the most part, segmented in a nice way. We need to define these a little bit more and add some more shape to them. So what we're going to do for this is I'm going to draw a little bit of a curve going over each of these segments. What these are each going to become is the shape of the individual petals. You can see there, and I'm going to do it on the other side as well. Fantastic. Those are just little arch shapes. Now I'm going to go ahead with my eraser and clean up the lines that I don't want. So I'm going to erase kind of like the rim of the bowl and then clarify some of these shapes. Okay, flower is on its way. Now, a lot of these, I'm not sure that I want it going directly in such a round shape, so I'm going to continue fine-tuning these and probably slimming up some of these petals by drawing a line that once again runs next to the previous lines that we've been drawing, but I'm basically cutting into the petals a little bit to make them not as close together. Also, these lines do not have to be perfect. We can clean them up with the eraser, and having them less than perfect just shows that it's an organic shape. If they were all straight lines, it would probably look a little less flower-like. This is also the point where you want to start making these lines a little bit more defined, since this flower is starting to take shape. And also, because we're racing, now we can bring in a little bit more of the center. Now, what I've also realized is I do want to see kind of the center point of the flower, so I'm going to get rid of my petal right here. You can keep it if you like. If you don't want to do this middle part, that's okay. But I kind of want to show the middle of the flower, so I'm going to do kind of like just like a half shape right there. And then maybe with that petal I just took out, I'm going to draw it down here. This is, for the most part, an elongated teardrop shape, or like a koi fish shape, which is rounded at one side and then it tapers into a long point. Now it looks as though our flower is, for the most part, sketched out. So before we move on to color, what we are going to do is just define any of these lines that we want to actually show in our end result. So any lines that you want to make just a teensy bit darker while still keeping them light enough to erase, that would be a good idea in case you need to. But a lot of my lines are a bit wispier and softer, so I'm just going to take the opportunity to define these. Also, you can see where the petals meet the stem is a little bit messy, so I'm going to take some time to clean that up. So this can be one of those points where it gets just a little bit confusing. So what I like to think about is remembering that all of these petals are going to the same point. And if I can keep them going in the same direction and kind of all joining at that imaginary center point that I mentioned before, then you can finesse these a little easier and you won't get lost in the little lines along the way. I should also note that when, let's say you have some pencil sketches that you want to keep in your drawing or your illustration, when you go over it with watercolor, it becomes harder to erase the pencil. So anything that is going to be left with pencil, it may not come off that easily once we add the paint, so keep that in mind as well. I'm not going to do too much to the back flowers, but I am going to define the edges of each petal a little bit more. And because these flowers are in the back, we can add just a little bit of shading in, by adding a darker line at the base of each of our petals that are in the back. So these darker lines, I'm just pressing a teensy bit harder and just repeating a straight line coming up from the back on each of the petals. I'm skipping the spaces between the petals while still defining everything. And for my petals in the back, when I am adding those lines, I'm not going into the center point of my flower here. Not just yet. We can do that with color. But if you do want to add a few just detail lines on some of your petals, feel free to do that, like I am doing right now. In case you're wondering, this is just from imagination. I don't have a reference point or a reference photo for this particular tutorial, but it is pretty straightforward, so we are just kind of winging it here. If you want to cut into some of your petals, they don't all have to be perfectly rounded. Some of them can come to points. I mean, that might change what type of flower it is. I'm not the best flower expert out there, so I can't tell you the name of what flower this would become if you made all these pointy, but depending on the angle, you might prefer a little bit of a point instead of a curve. Okay. Got some smudges. I'm going to clean those up. There. blow off the eraser dust before we add paint. Okay, so now we are ready to add in some color via watercolor paint. First thing I'm going to do is grab my larger brush, and I just want to put down a basic layer, a light wash, if you will, of watercolor, just a first coat. So I've decided to go with orange. You can make your flowers any color you want. The process will be the same regardless of color, but we're just going to start with orange. And I want this to be fairly light, so I'm going to use a good amount of water. So I'm repeatedly going into my water jar, loading my brush up. I don't want it soaking, so I kind of tap on the side here. I'll move this a little bit closer so you can see. I tap on the side to get some excess water off, but then I immediately go into my well and just kind of work the paint a little bit so it comes to a nice consistency. Once again, general rule of thumb, the more water you use, the lighter it will be, the less water, the darker the color will be. Also, not advisable to do what I am doing by moving your brush back and forth from water. I have my palette here and my jar here just for tutorial purposes, but it's probably not advisable to keep doing this. We'll test fate a little bit here, see if we get anything. Nope, we're good. Okay, back to the illustration. Okay, so I've got my watercolor almost where I want it. It also, on your paper towel, it does help to kind of have a little space, if not paper towel, then just a piece of paper where you can test your brush. It is kind of a guessing game, knowing how much you have, how much water is on your brush and in the palette. So having a piece of scrap paper or even your paper towel, as I mentioned, is a good way to get to kind of see what it's going to look like. I want to add a little bit more water on the paper towel. It looked just a bit darker than I wanted it, so I'm just going to go ahead and add some more water here. Okay, that might do it. Let's see how this looks. All right, yeah, nice and light. I am doing my best now to add in this wash of water. Generally, if it looks like there are spots that are going to be darker, I'm going to keep those closer to the bottom of the petals. I want my petals to be lighter as they get towards the edge. And I am just going to go ahead and add in this color to each petal. I'm probably going to do some color variations as well. But for that, we're going to have to wait until this first coat dries, which shouldn't be too long. It is just water, but it will be a few minutes. Also, remember, if there's any areas, like let's say a highlight that you want to remain white or with less paint, do that now. Do not cover it, because with this particular palette, we do not have a way to reintroduce white unless we go back in with some sort of white paint marker, acrylic, or a gouache paint that is white. So keep in mind, if there's anything that you would want to be white on your image, leave it white to the best of your ability at this stage. A lot of the water is already kind of soaked into my palette, so I've noticed that the paint is getting darker. I do want my petals in the back of the flower to be a darker shade of orange, so I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity with this darker wash to fill those in at this point. Gonna add some more water, just filling in the petals, filling in the petals, filling in the petals today. This is probably going to dry a little bit lighter than it looks right now, but that remains to be seen. Also, a good trick is if there is something that you added that maybe is a mistake, you can take a little bit of paper towel, and as long as there's a good amount of water on it, you can use your paper towel to kind of sop it up a little bit. So in this area, I left white because I kind of want that highlight, and I want that throughout these front petals. So I'm kind of wiping up some of the watercolor that I've added right here. And as you can see, pulling up a lot of that water actually removes the pigment as well. So for the lower part of the flower, closer to the stem, I'm going to go ahead and just reintroduce some more water. Some more watercolor paint, I mean to say. Okay, so these colors are looking pretty good. I do not want to forget about my fallen petal right here, so I'm going to get that guy as well. And after your petals, your first coat of paint on your petals is complete, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a stem color, which is going to be green, just for simplicity's sake. And we're just going to fill that in. I might actually, because I don't want it this green, I'm going to add some yellow. So I don't mind that they mix. Yeah, that's a little bit more of a springish lime green. So I'm gonna put that in there. Make sure it's consistent throughout. If there's any pooling of water, it is going to kind of be darker in those areas. So at this point where you're just adding in the first wash, go ahead and move the water with your brush or remove it with your paper towel if you don't want that particular area being darker. I've kind of pushed some of these water droplets down my stem, almost like it's a little water slide, and we're going to push it all the way at the bottom of the stem where this would be cut, because I want it darker down there. Let's fill in this little teensy bit area here. Got some bleed through. Ideally, between colors, you might want to wait for this to dry. I mean, between, like, let's say between your petals and your stem, if you don't want to risk blending your orange and your green, which do not blend nicely. Actually, I should take that back. They do create kind of a nice brown, which might be complementary to what we're doing. But generally, if you're trying to keep those separate, I would just wait for your petals to dry before you add in your stem. This looks a little splotchy here, so I'm just going to smooth out in the back. All right, first wash is in there. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry before we move on to our second coat. Alrighty. Seems like this is on its way to being dry. So before we go in and add some more painty details to our petals, I'm going to go ahead and mix in a brownish color. I want this to be kind of light. And this is going to be the center of our flower. Okay, there we go. This is a good chance that although I wanted this to be a bit darker, it could be one of the darker values overall in our painting. So that's something good to remember for shadows when we get to that point later. I don't want it this dark yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull up a lot of this water using just a crumpled piece of paper towel. And doing so, we have a little bit of pigment left behind, but the water is still soaked into the paper. So that actually can be a great time while the water is still wet to go in with a smaller detail brush. And I'm going to pull from a part of my palette, usually the corners that has less water pooling, and get some darker pigment. And with that, I can go in and start adding some little details here. Now, I'm just trying to do, I'm going to go actually with an even smaller brush. I'm just trying to do some little tiny circles. And this is coming across darker, which is perfect. I'm just adding in a lot of tiny little dots. Not going over my petals, I'm just doing my best to kind of stay close to the center here. I'm going to go ahead and add in a few over here. And having although most pigment was removed before I started these dots, having the paper still be damp helps retain some of the pigment that I'm adding now. Great. What we just did with our brown in the center, I'm going to do the same thing on our petals by adding some details in hopefully what's going to be a darker orange. So I'm getting a little bit of water on my brush and kind of going into an area on the edge of the paint palette to pull up some hopefully darker orange. Yep, that seems to be pretty good. So now I'm just going to kind of add in some line details. This can be a little tricky to get the brush to do what you want it to if you're not, let's say if you don't use a brush regularly, but that's why having a smaller one helps. But even if you don't have a tiny detail brush like this, a lot of even brushes, even the ones that come with the kit, if you use your fingers to form a point, you'd be surprised how tiny some of these lines can get if you just use that simple tip of the brush by pressing ever so lightly. And once again, they don't have to be crisp lines. It's actually nice if they kind of blend into the other the wash that we did earlier. So just play around with that and find something that works well with you or for you. Once again, I want these petals in the back to be darker. So I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity with a darker orange and add in some more color. I want to keep this color concentrated for the most part at the base, but I will go up with a line here or there to give some more detail to a lot of these flowers. Or petals. It's nice that the pencil, when it kind of, any pencil that's remaining that does blend in to paint, kind of becomes almost like a little shadow itself, which can be beneficial. So that's something to remember for next time on the front end of the project where you're just getting started. Retaining a lot of those pencil lines can work to your advantage, even in the color stage. Okay. So this is looking pretty nice, moving along. We're almost there, but I do want a little bit more differentiation between my back petals and my front petals. So in order to do that, I am going to add some yellow to the front petals to just kind of give them hopefully a lighter appearance. And actually, in order to do this, I might have to switch to my larger brush. There we go. And I might actually even bring in this yellow a little bit closer to those areas where I wanted to retain the white. I'm not sure that I want just pure white here, so I might bring it in a little bit. lot of time watercolor is just building up layers on layers on layers. So you'd wait for a lot of these to dry in between coats to give your wash a little bit more distinction and your color distinction between colors as well. We have a little bit more of a distinction now between the front petals and the back petals. I'm going to continue to build that up by adding some more brown to our back petals to kind of throw in some more shadow and darker value. I'm going to do this once again closer to the bottoms and then lift it up. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, this guy is looking pretty darn good. I would take the last moments to add in any other small details that you would like to add in. I, just for fun, might go in with a little bit of a reddish color and add some subtle little dots here on my petal, just to kind of give him some more vibrancy. If you're working and it's still wet, you kind of want to watch out. Make sure you don't put your hand or your brush or anything into an area that you may not want to smear or smudge. If the paper is still damp, if you're working with a wet on wet technique, then these will probably fade and blend in a little bit more. If you want these dots to be a bit more crisp, wait for it to completely dry and then just go back in, and then it will be like working, just like working on a dry media. Great. Lastly, I'm going to do the same thing with on the stem. I'm just going to try a little purple, purple and green don't necessarily mix. However, we can use that to our advantage to create something that's more like a shadowy hue, something akin to a shadow. Kind of blend this down, as well as adding in some dots. That was green, I meant to go purple, but no big deal, you can just smudge it out. Also, I haven't really touched my stem since the beginning, so it's relatively dry, so a lot of what I do on the stem is going to be a bit more defined and won't blend as much. You can have a lot of fun just playing around with different color combinations. That's one of the benefits of working with watercolor. It's just seeing what emerges as you blend colors together. It's not, you'd probably be surprised with a lot of the stuff that emerges. You know, things, acrylic is kind of acrylic paint, working with it. If you mix the brown, you know, the purple and the green together, you'd kind of get a muddyish brown color, but for watercolor purposes, it's kind of working out nicely. Also, when you have two colors that don't normally blend, when you do mix them, it can result in a darkish brown color, as you're seeing, which can also serve to be a great outliner in case there's some areas where you want to add definition, like I'm doing right here, where the petals meet the center point of the flower. Once again, just play around with it, you know, have some fun. It's all about experimentation, folks. It's the name of the game. Lastly, large brush, something I just do for a lot of my pieces. I'm just going to go ahead and add in some little details in the side. Maybe it's pollen, maybe it's just a fun part of the design. Doesn't have to be anything. But I got a lot of white space, so I sometimes do stuff like this just to fill that up. And as I'm doing this, I think we are just about wrapping up. So, hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It's a fun one because you can change up, depending on what shapes you make the petals, you can do a variety of different flowers. And by using those simple shapes we did in the beginning, you can kind of visualize the way these flowers are going to be arranged. So if we flip this design, you could have 2 flowers going the opposite way. You could even make an entire bouquet of flowers using this method, put them in a jar, or just have them on your piece of paper. Whatever works, but it's a fun little tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have not already, please do like and subscribe HCA program channel for other tutorials like this and other great content from other wonderful HCA instructors. And as always, folks, I will see you next week with another tutorial. In that time, please be safe, please be healthy, and I'll catch you next time.